I've made raised beds out of a variety of materials. This one is made out of composite deck boards, and it works really well, but it's kind of expensive. This one was made out of cedar lumber and corrugated metal. It works really well, but kind of expensive. And so what I want to do with this video today is to show you how to make a raised bed for the least possible cost, which is something everyone needs to look into considering the sky-high prices of building materials in 2021. I'm going to keep this project dirt cheap by using 6-foot cedar fence pickets. I'm going to use some scrap pieces of fir for the corners, a few screws, and that's about it. Total material cost about $12. One of the issues that always comes up when putting a raised bed in a yard is what do you do with the sod? This particular house was sodded with centipede. Most of the houses built in the coastal South Carolina in the last 10 years all have yards that have sod in them. And the question is, do you dig up the sod or do you leave it in place? Here's my feeling on this situation. If you're building a raised bed for flowers, leave the sod in place. You cover that sod up with good dirt, the grass will die, it will rot, and the nutrients will be available for the flowers. If you're building a raised bed for fruits or vegetables, I'd get rid of the sod, because the sod, of course, could have residual pesticides, herbicides. It may even have heavy metals in it because many of these sod farms use sewage effluent as fertilizer. So standard rule of thumb, flowers, leave the sod in place, fruits and vegetables, get rid of the sod. So this particular raised bed, the world's cheapest raised bed, is going to be used for fruits and vegetables. So the first step in the process is to outline the general shape of the garden and then dig up the sod and get it out of there. All right, so now we have the sod removed. Wasn't an easy job. That centipede sticks right to whatever is underneath it. We've removed the centipede sod, but now we have another problem. And this is a huge problem all across coastal South Carolina. A lot of these new houses have been built on questionable substrates. Most of the time, sand, and we see this right here. Looks like sand. Every now and then there's some clay, sand, clay, sand, clay. Never good for growing plants. Not only do I have a lot of sand and a little clay here and there, which has probably got something to do with how the construction site was worked before the house was built, but it also looks like it's pretty wet here. So wet sand, wet clay is probably the worst substrate to grow plants in. So we got to do something about this. All right, well, we haven't even begun to build the frame yet. We still have to deal with the soil problem here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my stash of cow manure and horse manure, and I'm going to lay some of that down here on the bottom. A lot of people don't like to use cow manure or horse manure because it has a lot of weed seeds. I don't usually find it a problem as long as it's buried. So the first thing I'm going to do is bring some manure in here and make a rich layer on top of this horrible wet sand. So it's really nice the way this manure kind of just settled down into this depression that was left when I removed the sod. I'm continuing to tally the cost of this bed, And I'm still at $12 because the manure was free. I went to a local stable and farm and picked up the manure that was just laying on the ground. And the compost that I'm going to lay on now, of course, was free. The only thing I have in that is a lot of effort. So I know you're all interested in this. This is my composter. Basically, it's just a garbage can that I drilled a bunch of 1-inch diameter holes in. And all through the last year, I took all my table scraps, put them in here. Every now and then, I just put the lid on it, roll it around, shake it around to sort of mix everything up. And when I went in and looked at it here this spring, deep, dark, rich compost. Well, I've mixed a bunch of my rich compost into the cow manure, and we're going to take a close look at what we have here. You can see my compost is a little green. There's a few eggshells here and there, a few vegetables, but I'm not too worried about this because we're going to add some more soil amendment a little bit later after we get the frame in place. But right now, we have to deal with the fact we put so much rich compost and manure in here, it's starting to pile up and spill over. So now, let's do the frame. All right, this is pretty simple. I have 2 of my cedar fence pickets cut at 48 inches. I have 2 of them cut at 49 inches. The 2 longer ones, those are so the corners will overlap nicely. The corners are going to be made with these 4x4s that I'll put in the corner and screw each of the boards into. These 4x4s, by the way, were laying around and I was going to throw them out. So project cost still at $12. All right, now we have the frame constructed. We have our 4x4s right there forming the corners with the nice overlap. We have a perfect square. And now the only thing left to do is to continue to fill with the right soil mix, and we'll probably deal with that tomorrow. So when we left off on this project, I had filled in some cow manure, some compost, and I was going to add some more soil material. And so what I added was some of this sphagnum peat moss. Peat moss has a really good effect on soil structure. And I figure I added maybe 2 or 3 gallons of peat moss just to give this soil mix some good structure. And then finally, I went to a friend's property and dug up some good forest soil and probably added about 2 or 3 gallons of forest soil in here just to add that mineral soil component. The peat moss probably cost me a couple dollars. Forest soil and all the other soil products were free. And then I figured the only other thing I had in here were the screws to hold the boards to the corners, and they were a nickel a piece. Now just a final note here about the soil material. I like to know where the soil is coming from that I'm going to be growing food in. And so I was lucky in that I had manure, I had compost. This sphagnum moss is a totally organic product, and the place where I got the forest soil, I knew that was also pretty much pristine and not polluted. You can go to some of these big box stores and you can spend a lot of money on bagged soil mixes. I would recommend you not do that. You can do just fine by finding locally sourced free materials to fill in this relatively cheap raised bed.